Hi everyone. Hi. Wow, this is a great crowd. So my name is Kayleen. Thank you for joining our artist talk at Martin Arts. For those of you that don't know Martin Arts, we host exhibits and events. This right now is Timeless Martin, so especially if you're from the area, you might see some gems like Spielberg's and Stewart Heritage Museum. And then there's also some works in there as well. We do events like the Martin Arts Awards, which is in November. Brooklyn is actually a nominee for that, so I definitely encourage you guys to attend November 2nd, Lyric Theater. And then we also have Arts Fest, our annual celebration. It is the second weekend of February. So we have something new and exciting planned. But again, thank you for joining us for navigating the literary landscape with Brooklyn Quintana. So I'm gonna put it over to her now, but again, thank you guys for coming. For a wonderful introduction and for putting everything together and for writing a really amazing article in Martin Arts magazine that I know at least some of you have read. Yes. And thank you to Martin Arts in general for putting on this talk tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity getting out and talking to the community about literature, writing, and kind of what it means to be an author is one of my favorite things to personally do, other than write books, obviously. So my name is Brooklyn Quintana. I am an author, an artist, and a content creator. The content creator thing we'll talk about in a little while. That rolls all into my job as an author. So before we get into a talk about the business side of things, I want to just give you a little bit of background about myself, how I got into this line of work, kind of why I chose to do this as a career, and my very interesting career trajectory from I thought I was going to be a lawyer to now this is what I'm doing. So when I was younger, I grew up playing classical piano. I was a theater kid. I loved art class, so painting, drawing, things like that. I love performing on stage, which is kind of how this kind of part of my job ended up being a big part of it. So I liked performing, I liked acting, I excelled at writing classes, history, rhetoric was one of my favorite core classes as well. So storytelling and talking in front of people is one of my favorite things. So when it became time to go to school and get a degree, my first inclination was that I wanted to go to film school. I initially had wanted to be an actor, but then I kind of shifted gears and was really into the directorial side of things. I liked shot composition, how lines are said, phrasing, making sure that everything came together to tell a cohesive story and narrative. So I went to my parents and I said, I think I'm gonna go to film school. And they said no. They said, pick something a bit more pragmatic that you can kind of spin off into an actual career and make money. So I said, okay, let me think about it. They said, why don't you get a business degree? That's what they both did. And I said, no, I'm gonna get an English degree. That's more applicable. It was not. So I ended up going to the University of Central Florida. I have a degree in English literature and creative writing. So while I was there, I kind of, when I was getting close to my senior year, got the senior scaries of realizing soon I have to go out into the world, get a job, make money. And I chose a really, really bad degree to do money with. So I was like, okay, what can I do with an English degree? I found out that parlaying an English degree into a JD, which is the graduate degree for lawyers, was actually something that a lot of people did. So I thought, all right, I like watching Law & Order, I can get into that, I can be a lawyer. So I liked reading, I liked dissecting information, extrapolating things that maybe people had missed, so I thought this is a perfect career avenue for me. So my senior year, I ended up working at Morgan & Morgan Law Firm. Morgan. Yes, and I met all of the Morgans. And I worked in Social Security, disability, and so my job was essentially to compile all of the information for the lawyers, pull out things that could bolster their claims when they went to court, and make it essentially a case that was winnable. I really liked that job. I worked with wonderful lawyers who took me under their wing. They kind of gave me advice, study material, told me this is how you do well on your LSATs, and they were there to kind of guide me through navigating how to transition from an undergraduate English degree into studying for the LSAT into going to law school. So after I graduated UCF, I had an opportunity to move back to my home state of Texas. I immediately went back the month after I graduated, and I ended up getting a job at Fidelity Investments. I did not work in the investment side. Nobody should ever trust me to do math. So I ended up working in the donor advised fund. And again, I had a really cool job where my essentially role was to make sure that money coming in was legal and money going out was legal, and to figure out kind of what people were doing with that money when they were giving to charities. And I really, really enjoyed that job. And it was a seasonal thing, and when it ended, I ended up getting a wonderful opportunity yet again. I stumble into wonderful opportunities a lot. So I moved to the internal corporate compliance sector, and I worked in the political law division, again, with a bunch of attorneys who were super, super great at their job. They were all up in cupboards in Dallas, and they, again, took me under their wing. And they kind of showed me the ropes, said, here's what you can do with a law degree, here's what you can do with this English degree, here's how we can parlay talking into being part of your job, because I enjoyed the networking aspect much more than I enjoyed the looking at spreadsheets aspect. So I was really, really into it. I was studying for my LSATs. I thought, yes, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a prosecutor. And then I realized, like 6 months in, I hated it. And I was sitting at a cubicle for 8 to 9, sometimes 10 hours a day, looking at spreadsheets, sad, and doing the job of a lawyer at 22 without a law degree. So I didn't know what I was doing. I was very, very stressed all the time. I was expected to do things that people much more experienced than me should be doing, and now I was. So I kind of took stock of the situation. I realized I'm not happy. I'm very, very stressed all the time. I have no social life. I have no friends. All I am doing is going to work and going home and sleeping because I'm just exhausted. So my mind kind of wandered, and my desire and ambition to become a lawyer very much dwindled, and my interest in really doing well at any of this was just obliterated entirely. There goes my book. So at Fidelity, in front of my cubicle, we had these beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows, and the building was built into the landscape. So we were on a hill in the woods, and we had our own herd of longhorn, because of course we did, it's Texas. So I was looking out at the nature all the time, and the animals, and we had bats that used to roost from the windowsills. So I was very easily distractible, and I was looking at that all the time, and my mind would wander, and I would start to think about stories that I heard as a kid, and stories that I liked as an adult, and movies that I really liked. And I would imagine characters out in the woods, and I was like creating my whole little fantasy land when I'm supposed to be reviewing like checks that are going out to politicians. And I realized that was definitely my calling. That's where I should be. That's what I needed to be doing. So I told my mom and dad, hey, I'm quitting. I don't want to be here anymore. And they said, well, we're surprised you lasted this long doing this. Good job. You finally have pulled the trigger on going where you should be. So when I left Fidelity, I talked to my mom and dad. I said, hey, I really think that what I should be doing is writing books. That has always been what I wanted to do. That's what I feel like I was meant to be doing, so I'm going to go do that. And I was very, very blessed to have parents who said, you know what, we believe in you, and we think it's a good idea. You're also 22, not married with no kids, so by all means, this is the time to be doing something insane. And so I went to my parents, and I said, okay, here's my business plan. And they said, all right, you have a year. Show us that you're taking it seriously. Show us that you want to make this a career. Show us that you can do it. And I did. So in 8 months, I wrote my first draft of my story. I sent my dad chapter by chapter. Every time I was done, we kind of talked about it, piece it together, kind of go over where I thought it was going to go, how the characters were, revise it. And when I was done, I gave it to my mom as a bound little late, very, very, very late Mother's Day gift. And she ended up reading it. What's important to know about my mother is she doesn't like whimsy, she doesn't like fantasy, and she doesn't like reading. So when she came back to me and said, this is a really good story, and I believe in you, and I think that you have something really special, I was like, gold star of approval, let's go, full speed. So I went and I edited and I edited and I edited it some more, and I bugged my dad every single day, have you read this chapter yet? Have you read this chapter yet? Have you read this chapter? And we would talk about it and talk about it, and then I went back to my mom with the final draft, and I said, okay, we're ready to go. So that brings me to the business side of things. So what you do when you have a finished draft as a writer. This is kind of going to roll into what I want to talk about as being a writer in the modern day versus when you could just Mary Shelley your way into a draft and all of a sudden you have Frankenstein because it's a well-written book and nobody cares about what hashtags you're using. So one of the first things you do when you are an author and you want to get your books out on the shelf is, how are you going to do it? There's two traditional avenues. There is traditional publishing, which is big 5 publishing houses like Random, Penguin, Brown, Scholastic. And there is independent publishing. I personally chose independent publishing. I thought it would be better for me and kind of fit more what I wanted to be doing. But I do want to talk about both because there are pros and cons, and the business of it really does overlap a lot. So a traditional publishing, the first thing you do is you send out queries to agents. So essentially you are hitting up random people cold calling via email, and you're saying, hey, I'm Brooklyn, I wrote this book, do you want it? And they'll say no, like 99% of the time. If you are lucky enough for them to say yes and take you on as a client, you are in like the 0.0001% of first-time authors going out there. Why you need an agent is because traditional publishing houses don't want to talk to you. They don't care, you're just a writer, nobody really gives a damn. So you go out and you get your agent, wonderful, you've landed them, you think you're doing great. You're not, because now you have to go and have your agent pitch to the large publishing houses. So what that means is they're essentially querying on your behalf now. So they're shopping your stuff around and saying, hey, I have Brooklyn's book, here's what it's about, do you think you could turn it into something that's viable, sellable, and will do well on the market? And again, 99% of the time they're going to say no. So if you somehow have an agent, and your agent gets you a deal at a traditional publishing house, from there, things get very, very interesting in the creative aspect of things. Because at a traditional publishing house, they have in-house editors, and they have in-house graphic designers and book cover designers for you. What that means is, once they say yes and they sign you and say, wonderful, welcome to Penguin Random House, let's go, you kind of relinquish a lot of your creative autonomy to that publisher. So their in-house editors will work with you and they'll say, hey Brooklyn, I think you need to get rid of chapter 3, 5, and 7. And you can say, no. And then they'll say, we don't care, because they don't work for you. They work for the publisher. And their job is to look at your manuscript, parse it piece by piece, look at it, compare it to the genre norms and standards of the industry. So I wrote a fantasy book. So I pick up another fantasy book and say, is Brooklyn's book close enough to this one that we could do something with it and kind of make it a comp and sell it? So they will Frankenstein your work into being something that they believe is sellable out on the market. Same with the book cover designers and graphic designers. They work for the publisher, they don't work for you. So if your lifelong goal is to have a book cover that's orange with like hot pink typage, that's wonderful and everything's great, but you're not going to get that. Because if you have a fantasy book and you say, I want it to be orange and pink, they will say, no, because all the fantasy books we have are blue and purple. Yours will be blue and purple so that when you walk by on a shelf, people can distinguish that as a fantasy book. That is their job, is to make it as marketable as possible and to make the packaging recognizable as something similar enough in the genre that people can say, oh, it's like book A, B, and C, I'll be interested in it. So that's their job. What turned me off about that is I didn't want to relinquish control of my book. As I said, when I was younger, I wanted to be a director, because I wanted to have control over every aspect of a film if I was going into it. I wanted people to talk how I wanted them to talk and be dressed how I imagined them to be dressed. So the thought of people chopping up my work that I have put so much time, effort, and energy into and sacrificed a lot for in my personal life, and then them hacking it apart into something unrecognizable and something that was beyond the scope of my original vision and passion was heartbreaking. And I like book covers. People do judge books by their covers, and I, as somebody who is passionate about art, really wanted to be able to say, like, I had a hand in it. So all of that was an immediate turnoff. As a side note, I did frame my first rejection query letter because I thought it was humorous. And I have it sitting next to my published copies of book 1 and 2. Nothing gets you through quite like spite sometimes. So I chose to go the independent publishing route. Like I said, I really wanted to have a lot of control over it, but I also found that as I went through the process, I really, really enjoyed the business side of things and found that marketing was like a side passion of mine that I wasn't aware that I had. So I formed an LLC to publish my books through. It's called Morpheus Media LLC. The original impetus of creating it was to separate myself as the person from the business as an entity. If anything goes wrong, that book is published and copywritten and everything through the company, and nothing comes back to me, which is a nice little safety net. Also, a kind of side aspect of it is that in the future, the goal is to publish other up-and-coming authors through that, because it's now something that I have experience in. It's something I know how to do, and with a background in English literature and creative writing, I do kind of have the credentials to be able to at least do like cursory pass over developmental and line edits for people. But that's down the road. So the problem with when you are an independent publisher is that you don't have a big corporate machine behind you, and you don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on things. So you have to budget and you have to be really smart about it. One of the things that I ended up saving money on that I ended up also realizing was really, really fun and enjoyed was the cover art process. It never occurred to me to do my own covers, but when I was looking through and waiting for my editor to get back to me, I was reaching out to cover designers, cover companies, all different people, just to see kind of what people were coming back with, what they said they thought was going to match industry standards but still adhere to my vision. And I ended up getting multiple emails from people saying, hey, we saw your Instagram and like the things you were posting, and we'll do it and take your money, but we think you'd be capable of doing it yourself. So it was kind of like a weird pat on the back that I hadn't expected from people, and I thought, well, I could save that $700 and move it into doing something else in the business. So I taught myself graphic design, and it's also really cool when you do talks like this and you try and encourage people into doing small businesses or pursuing a creative career to be able to say, oh, by the way, I also did all the cover work and the marketing work and all the chapter head designs and everything like that. So that's just kind of a fun extra bit. The other aspect is we talked about those in-house editors. So you don't have an in-house editor because you are the publisher. And I have read it 13 times. 13 times, there's still errors in there. 13 times, it's still not perfect. 13 times, you're still going to miss things or have weird plot holes, and people are going to remind you that you talked about a character in chapter 7, and by chapter 33, you finally bring them up again. And it has happened. So there are resources out there for indie authors, and I ended up pursuing one called Readsy. Readsy is essentially a LinkedIn compilation of people who work in the publishing industry but also do freelance work. So they are professionals, they work with traditional publishing houses, but they also take on clients who are serious about turning this into a career. So what I did is I filtered through all of the editors, and I found editors who specifically worked in my genre, which is fantasy. I looked at the books that they had done and said, okay, these are comparable. I compiled 6 people, I reached out to them, and I asked all 6 of them, can you do a sample edit? So I sent everybody the same exact thing. I sent everybody a 7-page prologue and said, how would you edit it? And when I got everything back, I compared who changed what. Obviously, if there's a spelling mistake, they're all going to change the same thing, but some people had the intuition to be able to say, your voice kind of changed here, or the pacing seems a bit off on this page and you need to pick it up here, or I see this as a vision for the future in this chapter spinning off of this. So it was those people who have the wherewithal to add the extra and say, here's what I think could be done with this, that I really focused on. I think I narrowed it down to like 3 or 4 at that point. And it really came down to how I interacted with those editors. So the final narrowing down process was, how are me and this person vibing? Because my books are long. I mean, this was 700 pages. So they're long, there was a lot of work to be done, and I needed people to see my vision for what I wanted my series to be and understand what the book was going to be about. I ended up with a wonderful developmental editor. Her name is Carrie. Carrie used to work at Penguin. She was superb. She answered my paranoid emails at 2 in the morning and told me everything was going to be okay and that I was allowed to go to sleep. So Carrie was very, very, very supportive and optimistic, and we worked really well together, and I used her for book 1 and book 2. So having that is also an advantage because they are not an in-house editor, they are your personal editor. She is working for me. If Carrie came back to me and said, Brooklyn, I think you should get rid of chapters 3, 5, and 7, I could just say no if I wanted to and keep it. I didn't, because this was my first book, and I realized that Carrie had 15 or so years of experience that I did not have, and she worked in the industry and she knew what to do. So I listened to her, but at the end of the day, if I wanted to keep a paragraph and Carrie said no, I was keeping the paragraph. So having that creative control, I really think is the primary pro compared to, say, traditional publishing. Another big factor in the publishing process as a modern author that people need to, spend more time on and thinking about is that your job as an author is not just to write the book and you're done with it. There's so much more that goes into it, like things like this talk. But what I want to talk about is buyability versus relatability versus marketability. Because whether you're traditionally published or whether you're independently published, all 3 things are absolutely integral to become a successful and thriving author in the modern day. Like I said, you're not Mary Shelley, you're not F. Scott Fitzgerald. Writing a good book at this point doesn't matter. It is your personality and your social media and platforming presence that is the primary tool to getting your book out there to the most people and getting things sold. So with buyability, it's pretty obvious based on the name. Buyability is your product going to sell as a complete package? So even though I went the indie route, I still did a lot of market research because I am in charge of everything. So I did go to Barnes & Noble. I spent a lot of time in the fantasy section picking up books, saying I like this cover, I hate this cover, I like this cover, I hate this cover. Taking pictures, taking them home, and seeing how I could workshop them into my own unique individual design. So buyability was very important, because I knew I was going in with an uphill battle because I chose for my debut novel a 772-page story that did not fit into a specific genre. So I kind of had to cobblestone things together and hope that doing market research and really putting in every bit of effort and time I had was going to help me out. So with buyability, it does have a cover that kind of correlates to other market standard covers out there. It has a story that adheres to classic fantasy tropes enough to be qualified as classic fantasy while still becoming its own unique individual thing. Buyability as well is packaging all together. Is this something that stores can be able to sell? Yes, because all of the marketing material are base colors of just black, white, red, and a hint of gold. It's very easy to turn this out. It's very cost effective. You don't have too much things going on. It's not embossed, it's not engraved. We can get things going quickly and cheaply, so it gets things out the door as well. The next, and I think the most key thing, is relatability, because back then you used to write a good book and people would say, oh yeah, I know who Ernest Hemingway is by name, but you probably weren't going to pick out his picture like in the 40s and 50s unless you were actively at school reading his book. Nowadays, authors are front and center. We have to do events, and you have to go out, you have to be on social media, and as silly as it sounds, you have to be on TikTok, and you have to be kind of up with the youth these days. So relatability is, if buyability is your book, can I market it, can I sell it, can I get it out there without the force of the author being there? Relatability is, how does the author factor in as a person, part of the brand, part of the package? Are you relatable as an author? Recently, you see a lot of author scandals because people come out on Twitter or Instagram or even Facebook and say wild things, and they just tank their careers. So you want to remain as neutral as possible while still having a personality. Another part of relatability is if you are approachable. There are a lot of authors out there like J.D. Salinger who never left their house and they didn't talk to anybody and they were hermits. Wonderful for back then, again, when you could just write a book and nobody cared because it was a good book. Now you have to get out there. You have to talk to people. If you are off-putting at an event, people will talk about it, and for whatever reason, that means that your book is bad. So you have to do events, you have to be relatable, you have to be approachable, and that also means tailoring how you present yourself as an author, as part of your brand, to the sort of branding and book that you have turned out. I went the pragmatic approach because I didn't feel like being performative. I didn't want to get up on stage and pretend I was the type of person who was the president of a sorority or a cheerleader. It's not my personality type. I'm not a raw, energetic kind of person. I will talk to you and I will tell you about things that I am passionate about, but it will be at a tempered level. My book is a dark fantasy book, if you can't tell by the blood splatter. I like dark. If I show up in pastels, it would be a very disingenuous vibe that I am giving off that is not authentic to who I am or what my story is about. So it's that relatability of, is this person being genuine? Is this person reflecting the kind of brand and the kind of work that they've turned out? So that is all part of the relatability aspect. Now, buyability and relatability all roll into marketability because me, my book, and we are all a package. So most of the time, I sell tons more books if I'm actually at events. So when I do things like Comic-Cons, when I do book brewery events, when I do talks at high schools, it translates into a lot of sales because now people have a face behind the book and they have a personality, and I can talk to people one-on-one and tell them not only about my journey as a career, my passions, my interests, what the book is about, but like I can just shoot the breeze with people and you're creating connections. So that's part of the marketability aspect, as well as, like we talked about earlier, keeping everything adherent to genre norms, book standards, publishing industry standards, things like that. So these are aspects that the majority of people in the publishing and literary industry, especially going into it, really overlook nowadays. At this point, 40% of my job is writing books, and 60% of my job is filming TikToks, posting Instagrams, making sure that my search engine optimization is as best as it could be, that I know what hashtags are trending, things like that. It sounds absolutely ridiculous, but that is the modern landscape that we are in, which brings us to the next point of branding and platforming. So platforming is super important. My book is a new adult fantasy book. So my target audience is usually around 15 to 35, which means while Facebook is wonderful for remembering my aunt's birthdays and what schools my cousins are going to right now, it's not generating sales for me. That is not my target audience. So Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, these are important for me. When I first started out, I thought TikTok was absolutely ridiculous because I was not going to get in front of the camera and dance in my living room. But it has turned out to be a remarkable sales tool once you figure out how TikTok can be useful. So that's the platforming aspect of it. You also have to roll in the branding aspect, which we talked a little bit about with relatability and buyability. My branding, again, is very genuine to who I am. If you ever see any over-enthusiastic yelling or pom-pom waving on anything I ever post, it's not me. That's not me at all. So it is usually going to see darker colors. Like I said, I love to throw blood splatter on all of my marketing tools. My press kit that goes out to magazines, podcast hosts, interviewers, radio shows, things like that, is also a black and white photo of me with black and red and gold embellishments. So everything is standardized, everything looks uniform, everything is packaged the same way so that if you see black, red, and gold one day, you'll be able to be like, ah yes, that's Brooklyn's book, we know what it's about, we know what book series this is. So that's all rolled in together with branding. Branding is also attending events that are specific to your genre. It would be very strange if I showed up to a 60 and over women's club to talk about my book, because they are not my primary demographic. Going to high schools, hanging out on TikTok, doing TikTok lives, Instagrams, doing a lot of podcasts, that's where I'm generating a lot of sales. It's where I'm generating a lot of interest. It's where I'm generating a lot of hits on my website, because that is where younger, new adult age readers are hanging out. So that's pretty much the business side of being an author today. It's no longer about writing a good book. Writing a good book at this point is almost irrelevant if you have read any of the TikTok famous books. You do not have to write a good book to make money. What you have to do is you have to be present, you have to have a strong brand, and you have to be out there in front of people, reminding people constantly who you are, what you wrote, what you're doing, and how they can get your next book. Which brings me to, that's me, that's my book. They're available on Amazon Prime. They are available everywhere. But I want to talk about specifically when you are on podcasts. We talked a little bit about social network communities already. But podcasts, again, a great way to get out there, a great way to platform your story, a great way to tell people, hey, it's on Amazon, you can get it, it's discounted right now, and generate more and more sales. And in terms of resources, as we're kind of winding this aspect down, Readsy was the primary resource that I used. Again, it's like a LinkedIn profile for people in the publishing and literary industry. And it is a great resource if you don't even want to use these people, just to connect with them and kind of get information, to get experience, insight, advisement, things like that. And that brings us to, if you want more information about me and my work and the things I'm doing in the podcast I've been on, you can scan that QR code or follow any of those things. And I thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking time out of your evenings to listen to me ramble on about books and my passions. And I hope at least some of this information was useful to you. So thank you guys.
So now we're going to do the Q&A section. I wondered if any of you guys had some questions for Brooklyn. Yes?
When is book 3 coming out? There you go. Yes.
So discount her, that's my mom. Her question doesn't count. She also doesn't count. It's 2026 sometimes. So we're shooting for spring 2026. How to push it back for life events.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So before, let's take this back 20 years or 15 years ago, before you had TikTok and LinkedIn and all the social media platforms. How would you do something like this?
Nepotism helps. Knowing people in the industry was definitely a good way of getting your foot in the door. Other than that, it was like luck of the draw back then. I feel like before the advent of social media and social networking and platforming and things like that, writing a good book and a solid, well-written book mattered just so much more to you actually getting landed with an agent and things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You listed like so many different ways authors can like just parts of their business that they need to focus on. What's like one piece that maybe they're overlooking that they should spend more time on to help with their books?
I think developing interpersonal skills and the ability to network is super key. I think that the stereotype that authors are usually weird introverts is 100% correct, and we don't thrive out in social settings. but being able to connect with people, go up and shake somebody's hand, say, hey, thank you for coming to this event, I'm Brooklyn, here's my book, that kind of thing. It gets your name in front of people, it makes you more relatable, you seem like a person who's out here, you know, hustling, doing your business, and that's how you get book sales. You can't be standoffish, especially like if you are at a networking event or you're at another kind of book event or Comic-Con or things. If you're quiet and a wallflower, you're not going to stand out. People are going to overlook you and people aren't going to come to your booth and talk to you and buy your book. Yes, ma'am.
Social media and your platforming, how do you keep up with it with so many different platforms? Do you create your content ahead of time and just schedule it all out? What are your steps to do that?
When it comes to TikTok and YouTube, I'll have pre-saved drafts. That way, Monday morning or something, I can send it out and be like, okay, that's done, I don't have to worry about it. Instagram is a bit more organic in that if I'm doing an event or I'm on a podcast or I'm somewhere in a studio, I will post like, here's where I am, here's the tag for it, and connect mine to whoever podcast or interview or something who's hosting me. So yeah, when it comes to Instagram things, it's more organic, more genuine, it's more in the moment, and then the other things is just tailored so that I don't have to constantly be on my phone.
Brooklyn, is your book available electronically? There are the books?
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
It is remarkably harder than you would think to convert it to ebook. So 2026 is planned for the ebooks and also working on audiobooks.
Okay. And then I was curious, your books, something Tolstoy never had to worry about, the length of your books. Have you ever thought about cutting them in half and going, gee, here's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4?
Yes,
Just
so
because people, they can't concentrate on it.
everybody has brought this point up. It won't happen. But just so we all know the background, this is 772 pages. I cut out 40,000 words when I was working with my editor, so it was longer, so I saved you some time.
Well, to add to that, working at a high school, that does not scare kids. Having it that big.
No, some kids
So,
really like
They really
to
like
invest
the
a lot of
books.
time with it.
Yeah.
Some kids like short books, I don't blame them, but there are, when I've talked to the high school kids, a lot of kids like the big chunker books because you get to spend a lot of time with the same characters and you don't have to remember new plots like reading 4 books at once. But maybe I'm biased, I don't know. Yeah.
So you talked about when you were working for, I think it was Fidelity, and you had all of this nature that was kind of where your mind was wandering. Where was that part of your inspiration for actually what went into these books, or where did you kind of pull that inspiration from?
100%. I have a really, really weird niche love of nature horror. So if anything is set in the jungle and scary, like I'm gonna love it. And I don't know if that came because I was working at a law office in the woods and I was just kind of projecting a little bit. But it definitely rolled into like, what if we threw 12-year-olds in a jungle and it was terrifying as a plot for a story. Good one.
How much of what you're talking about would you say has to do with your genre? My cousin is writing a book. It's a historical fiction. She's not going to go to Comic-Con to talk about it. She's not going to have TikToks.
I think a lot of it's still applicable. So a big part of my job is also not only networking with prospective readers, but also other authors. So I've talked to a lot of people who write lit fiction, contemporary, things like that, even a couple of historical fiction people, historical nonfiction people, so all over the place. There are actually a lot of conventions in Florida specifically tailored to historical nonfiction stories. So I would say that's super applicable. And then there's things in town, there's different literary magazines that are tailored to fiction, nonfiction, poetry, like that. So just being willing to put yourself out there and reach out to people and say, hey, I've written a book, I'd like to be involved in X, Y, or Z event, I think is applicable despite genre.
How often do authors move from genre to genre? Do they generally pick a genre and stay there, or go on to other things and have a broader audience?
I don't know. Personally, I have the ADHD, which is why I was not so great at sitting in a cubicle for a long period. So like when I was writing my book, I couldn't do straight fantasy. So book 1's like jungle adventure terrifying, and then book 2's like what if Lewis Carroll liked medieval times a bit more? And I kind of just like to switch it up. Book 3 has zombies, so I just like the hot genre. I don't know what other people are doing.
What was the editing company that you said you were through?
I went through Reedsy. It's like a platform company. They have editors, marketers, cover designers, even book formatters on there. So super useful.
When you went to write the book, did you have like the full story in your brain and then you just had to fill in pieces, or did you just start writing and the story evolved?
No, I was like a beautiful mind. Like I had the board with the string and I was connecting the dots. So I pretty much had it all mapped out, ready to go, which you would think would save you time. It didn't. But yeah, no, I've had it planned out. I've got all the books planned, ready to go. I just gotta find the wherewithal and the willpower to write them. Yep.
Can you talk at all about the production of the physical paper and ink?
Yeah, so I use a printer called Ingram Spark. It is done through Lightning Source. Lightning Source is their parent company. They are the ones who print books for places like Random House and Penguin. So most of the books that you pick up in like Barnes & Noble and things are printed and manufactured by Lightning Source. Ingram is their kind of subsidiary company for independent authors. They use the same exact printer and they use the same paper and everything, so it's the same quality as if you bought a book via traditional publishers. Also, one of the benefits about using Ingram and Lightning Source is that because they are rolled into one, it means that your book immediately enters the global distribution channel, so it can be bought overseas and produced overseas as well in any Lightning Source and Ingram publisher in various countries, which is super useful. The only downside is that the price of ink and paper keeps changing. So I'm constantly getting emails saying the book has to fluctuate in this price, so you never get the same income every month, unfortunately.
And how long does it take when you say, I need you to produce me, say, what do you say, 100 books, or do you say 50 books at a time? Or
So
1,000?
mine are conveniently printed on demand, so if you buy one from like Amazon or something, sometimes they have a stock of them in the warehouse and they'll ship in like 2 days. I think the longest turnaround I've heard from people when they purchase it is about a week. So it's usually pretty good, unless you're buying in Canada, and then God only knows what happens to those books, but I've had a lot of complaints and I have to keep redirecting people over to the printer because I'm like, that's not me. That's Amazon, that's the printer, I don't know what's happening at the Canadian border with books, but it's been a real problem recently. Yeah.
You talk about like social media, like TikTok, YouTube, and all the social media platforms. So when you make a post and it doesn't gain much traction, how do you like keep up that drive to keep posting? Like, what is your process with that?
A consummate fear of failure helps, but also knowing that nobody else is working on it but me, so if it fails, it was because I wasn't doing enough. So I try to make sure at minimum I post every other day. Maximum, I don't want to post more than twice a day because I don't want people to get tired of me. But if a post doesn't do well, I kind of try to investigate why it didn't gain enough traction. Like, was it the hashtags I used? Was the coloring off? Was it just a weird caption? Things like that. And then I'll find comparable posts from other authors that did do well and see, you know, what was the difference. If we have both have the same picture of a book, why was theirs gaining so much more viewership than mine?
Can you describe your made-up or your preferred genre of dark fantasy? How do you describe it?
I don't know if you're familiar with the romantasy thing going on.
Well, I'm familiar that it's a in my time that it's a new genre.
Yeah, so I'm not about dragon smut and fairies and things. So it's the opposite of that, if anybody's wondering. But think like classic Tolkien-esque fantasy with just more blood.
With more blood.
More
okay.
blood. I like to just splatter it everywhere. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
But when we met months ago to kind of plan something like this, me and Brooklyn just hit it off immediately. I'm proud to call her a friend. I love fantasy, folklore, history, so all of that. Again, I did write an article about her. The magazine is outside in the hallway.
It's a great article.
Thank Thank you. And again, you know, we have a membership, so if you guys enjoyed this, we definitely encourage you guys to be a member. We have a lot of fun stuff planned. But is there no more questions in the crowd? Okay. I do think we have one more question.
Brooklyn. I am a Fynneas fan. I love your creativity. I love your spirit. As you continue to write more stories, would you consider writing a new one with me? I want to spend every chapter the rest of my life with you. Brooklyn, I love you. Will you marry me? We will be having guests over. If you know us, we'll be at the waterfront. Everybody who knows us is invited.